Today, we revisit Christmas Eve, 1945, when 5 children vanished from a burning home in West Virginia. No bodies, no screams, just smoke and silence. Some say it was fire. Others whisper it was something darker. So lean in as we enter the chilling mystery of the Sodder children. There's a phone call. 12:30 a.m., Christmas Eve, 1945. A woman's voice, calm but confused, asks for someone who doesn't live there. The operator later says the voice seemed off, like a smile was stitched over something else. Jenny Sodder, groggy and polite, tells her she has the wrong number. She hangs up. Then she notices the lights are still on. The front door is unlocked. Her kids, 5 of them, had asked to stay up late, play with their new toys. Now their beds are empty. The ladder that's always leaned against the house? Gone. The cold truck, suddenly inoperable. The phone line cut at 1 a.m. The house is burning. By dawn, the 2-story Sodder home is ash. Firefighters, if you can even call them that, considering they arrived 7 hours late, say they found no bones. Not a tooth, not a fingernail, nothing. Let me say that again. 5 children allegedly burned alive in a house fire, and there is no trace of them. What kind of fire erases human remains but leaves appliances? How do people vanish while others are steps away? Why did no one search for them properly? Why, more disturbingly, does it feel like someone didn't want them to be found? A prank call, a missing ladder, a cut line, a mother who swears she saw her children alive through the flames, and a town that just wants it buried. This isn't a tragedy. It's a performance. And someone wrote the script years before the fire ever started. Fayetteville, West Virginia, 1945. A town small enough that everybody knows your business, but just big enough that they pretend they don't. Nestled in the Appalachian Hills, held together by coal, Catholic guilt, and gossip. This was America fresh out of war, drunk on victory and suspicion. The country wore red, white, and blue on its sleeve, but its heart was stitched in gray mistrust, especially toward immigrants, especially toward Italians. If you spoke with an accent, you were either the enemy or you were about to be one. Enter George Sodder. Born Giorgio Soddu in Tula, Sardinia, he sailed to America at age 13. Nobody knows why he left Italy. Some say he was running from something, or someone. He found work on the railroads, hauling water and grit, until he taught himself to run a trucking business. By all accounts, he was successful, stoic, stubborn, and very, very opinionated. George hated Mussolini, loudly, publicly, in an Italian immigrant community that still had sympathizers. This wasn't just taboo, it was dangerous. He married Jenny Cipriani, a fellow Italian immigrant with deep religious roots, and they had 10 children. 10. The kind of family that radiated chaos and warmth in equal measure. But the town, small and suspicious, watched them closely. People talk when you stand out. They whisper when you succeed. And when you speak out against dictators in a town full of quiet, fascist ghosts, they don't forget. So by 1945, with Christmas lights twinkling over ice-crusted windows and a war-weary nation pretending everything was fine, the Sodder family had no idea how many eyes were on them, or how many hands were already moving against them. This wasn't just a fire waiting to happen. This was a warning wrapped in tinsel. Let me tell you about the Sodder children, not the statistics, not the theories, the kids. Maurice was 14, oldest of the 5 who vanished. Serious, sensitive, the kind of boy who carried responsibility like it weighed something, even when it didn't have to. He helped George with the trucks, ran errands, wanted to be a mechanic. Martha was 12, bright-eyed and sharp-tongued, loved to sing. She had this way of walking into a room like she already knew what everyone was thinking. Louis, 9, and Jenny Jr., 8, inseparable, partners in crime. Shared secrets, shared sweets, probably share more knowledge about that house than any adult did. They had that rare sibling telepathy that only kids understand. And Betty, just 5, the baby of the vanished 5. Her world was dolls, sugar, and shadows too big for her to understand. That night, Christmas Eve, they were giddy. The older siblings, Mary and John and George Jr., had already gone to bed. Jenny, the mother, tucked in the little ones around 10 p.m., but they begged to stay up, play a bit longer with their new toys. She said yes. It was Christmas, after all. She never saw them again. And here's the twist that never untwists. She didn't hear them scream. Not once. The fire raged for 45 minutes. The room was above her, with floors, thin walls, and still no cries for help, no panicked footsteps, no pounding fists. It's as if they were gone before the fire even started. You can't misplace 5 children. You can't forget their faces, their laughter, the way they said your name when they wanted something. You don't just wake up and accept that they evaporated into smoke. And yet, the world told the Sodders to do exactly that. To bury 5 caskets full of nothing. To say goodbye to children they couldn't even confirm were dead. To swallow doubt like medicine and never, ever spit it back out. This isn't about grief. It's about absence, the kind that never stops echoing. And the 5 small lives who slipped through the cracks of history, clutching their Christmas toys and secrets no one ever forced them to reveal. Midnight, December 25th, 1945. The last perfect moment is a laugh. Jenny Sodder hears an echo from downstairs. Betty giggling at something, maybe a toy, maybe her siblings being silly. Jenny smiles, turns over in bed, the warmth of Christmas still clinging to the walls. Half an hour later, the phone rings. That wrong number call. Here's what follows like a string of curses. She notices the lights are still glowing. Strange. They always turn them off. The door is unlocked. Stranger. George always locks it. She checks on the kids. The younger 5 are gone from their beds. Then she hears a loud thud on the roof. Something rolling. Then silence. That's not thunder. That's not Santa. That's a setup. At 1 a.m., flames erupt from George's office. A room filled with fuse boxes, wires, gasoline. Within minutes, the house is an inferno. George and Jenny, along with 4 of the children, manage to escape. But when they try to rescue the others, the latter, always propped against the side of the house, is missing, just gone. George smashes a window, slashes his arm open, tries to climb, but the walls are too high. He runs to his trucks. He plans to drive one next to the window and climb it, but both trucks fail to start. Trucks that ran perfectly the day before. They try to call for help. The phone line is dead. Later they find it was cut, not burned. Let me repeat that. Someone cut the phone line before the fire started. That's not mischief. That's premeditation. When the fire department finally arrives, 7 hours later, they do almost nothing. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, allegedly tells them to just leave it be and wait until daylight to search the rubble. He says he saw no bones, no remains, just ash and ruin. But George knows better. Bones don't burn that easily. Not in 45 minutes. Not in a house fire. You'd need a crematorium. And this was no crematorium. This was theater. A show someone wanted the town to watch. And forget, there's something sinister about how neatly it all lined up. The phone, the trucks, the ladder, the silence. It's almost like someone wanted the fire to happen. Almost like someone knew what they were doing. Let's talk about bones. If 5 children died in that fire, where are their remains? Not even a shard of skull. Not a jaw. Not a single molar from 5 developing mouths. And don't say they burned. That lie has already died its own death. Because here's the truth. Animal bones survive house fires. That's not speculation. That's physics. Jenny Sodder, unable to accept the silence of the official narrative, tested it herself. She burned animal bones in her oven for hours. High heat. Again and again. Every time, bones remained. So either her children spontaneously combusted with military precision, or they weren't in that fire. Let's add another layer of weird. Witnesses. Plural. Not drunks. Not dreamers. People who had no horse in the race. One woman swears she saw the missing Sodder kids in a passing car, while the fire still blazed in the distance. Another, a waitress, says she served them breakfast the following morning in a rest stop 50 miles away. The children were quiet, nervous, accompanied by 2 men, and 2 women with foreign accents. Another said she saw them in a hotel in Charleston weeks later, with adults who refused to let the children speak. Sure, these are unconfirmed. Witnesses can lie. Memory can play tricks. But here's the million-dollar scream into the void. Why did so many strangers come forward to say the same thing? That they saw 5 terrified children matching the Sodder kids' descriptions alive? And if it wasn't true, why didn't the authorities follow up? The fire chief, F.J. Morris, eventually changed his story. He claimed to have found a heart in the ashes and buried it secretly in a box. When investigators exhumed the box, it contained nothing but beef liver, untouched by fire, planted. What kind of sick farce buries meat and calls it closure? This wasn't an investigation. It was a burial of facts, of leads, of children, 5 voices, gone without echo, while adults around them twisted stories into a tapestry of convenience. The police said they did their jobs. The firemen said it was an accident. The insurance company said, let it go. But the Sodders couldn't let it go, because the truth kept screaming from the ashes. Something else happened here. Let's pretend for a second that everyone wanted to find the Sodder children. Just humor the idea. The local police department investigated for 2 whole hours before slapping conclusion on the fire. Faulty wiring. Case closed. Except the lights were on during the fire, and George had just had the wiring inspected weeks prior. Certified safe. Still, that was enough for the county to wash its hands of the whole thing. Enter private investigator C.C. Tinsley, a man who, for once, didn't seem allergic to common sense. He poked around and quickly discovered that Fire Chief Morris had not only lied about finding human remains, he'd fabricated evidence to help close the case. That box with the so-called heart? It was raw liver. No burn marks. No decay. Just liver. Planted. Why? Who told him to? Theories spiral like wildfire in the dark. Theory 1. The Mafia. George had enemies. He was outspoken against Mussolini, deeply unpopular among local fascist sympathizers. Maybe the fire was a warning. Shut up or we'll make you disappear. But why take the children? Why not just kill him? Theory 2. Child trafficking. Dark, yes, but disturbingly plausible. Witnesses claimed to see the children alive in strange company. The 1940s weren't exactly the golden age of child protection laws. 5 attractive, healthy kids? That's a sick market. And the clean, quick nature of the disappearance? Coordinated, precise. Theory 3. Kidnapping for revenge. Some point to a man who had threatened George after a business dispute. Your house will go up in smoke, and your children will be destroyed. That was a year before the fire. How prophetic. Theory 4. Cover up by local authorities. Now we're getting deep. What if someone in law enforcement, or tied to them, was responsible for the fire? What if the very people who were supposed to help already knew what happened? And then there's this. The Sodders received a bizarre photo in 1967. A man in his 20s. No return address. On the back, Louis Sodder. I love Brother Frankie. Illo Boys. A 90132 or 35. Louis, one of the missing 5. The man looked eerily like Louis would have as an adult. But the message? Like a ransom note passed through a blender. Was it a cruel prank? Or was it the closest thing to a confession they'd ever get? Theories are oxygen in a case like this. They keep the fire burning. But every time you inhale, you choke on the smoke of corruption, incompetence, or something worse. By the 1950s, the case had cooled in the public eye. Newspapers stopped asking questions. Officials shrugged and patted themselves on the back for solving a fire with no remains, no cause, no answers. But the Sodders didn't bury their children. Not in caskets, not in memory, not in theory. Instead, they built a billboard, 30 feet tall, black and white. 5 solemn faces staring out at Route 16 like ghosts frozen in time. What was their fate? It screamed. Kidnapped, murdered, burned? It asked. It became a landmark of grief and defiance. For decades, it loomed, and below it, a reward offer, $5,000, then $10,000. That's not chump change. That's desperation written in dollar signs. George and Jenny transformed into full-time investigators. They tore through states like detectives high on grief and gasoline. They hired psychics. They dug up leads from New York to Texas. They followed whispers to orphanages, backwoods towns, even a Catholic monastery where someone claimed Lewis was living under a new name. And with every step, the story got weirder. One woman wrote to them from Oklahoma, claiming her roommate had confessed on her deathbed to knowing where the children were buried. The Sodders passed a letter to authorities. They never heard back. A man in Florida sent them a photo he claimed was of one of the boys, alive and well. The photo was grainy, but it had the right eyes, the right jawline. Was it real? A hoax? They never found him to ask. And always, circling like vultures in silk gloves, were the local officials, downplaying, dismissing, denying. Every time the Sodders uncovered something, it disappeared. Every door they knocked on was already bolted shut. George aged like a man carrying a casket in his chest. He kept a ladder in his yard for years, leaning just right, waiting for a moment that never came. He was often seen standing at the edge of his property, staring into the mountains, like he expected someone to walk back out of them. Jenny, once a devout Catholic, stopped going to church. She couldn't believe in a God that let this happen. She wore black for the rest of her life, mourning not 5 deaths, but 5 question marks. You want a turning point? Fine, here it is. The moment George and Jenny realized no one was coming to help, that justice had packed his bags and left town long ago, and that they were now the only people on earth who gave a damn about what really happened. Let's get this out of the way. There was no official breakthrough, no trial, no confession scrawled on a deathbed napkin. No child stumbled homegrown and broken, whispering the truth. Instead, we got closure theater. In 1950, the state issued a death certificate for each of the 5 missing Sodder children. Cause of death? Fire. Evidence? None. Bodies? Not even a fingernail. And the way authorities acted, you'd think the Sodders were the criminals for asking questions. But the questions didn't die, they multiplied. Who cut the phone lines? Who disabled the trucks? Why was the fire department 7 hours late? And what kind of man lies about finding a human heart, buries a cow liver in a box, and walks away clean? Was a fire even meant to kill, or just to cover something else? Let's talk about that photograph again. The one mailed in 1967. Lewis Sodder, maybe older, staring blankly at the camera. On the back, Lewis Sodder. I love Brother Frankie. Illo Boys. A 90132 or 35. It's the kind of message you get when someone is trying to scream through a muzzle. Nonsense, or code, or trauma so deeply buried it only leaks in fragments. Jenny and George hired another private eye to track the sender. He went to Kentucky, promised a report back. He vanished, like the kids, like the truth. Poof. Even decades later, when scientists analyzed soil from the site of the fire, they only found human vertebrae, not 5 bodies. And the bones? They showed no sign of fire damage, and weren't from a child. They were adult remains, probably from another location entirely. Yes, let that sink in. Someone buried adult bones on the Sodder property and tried to pass them off as their children. That's not incompetence. That's sabotage. So what are we left with? A fire that doesn't act like a fire. A town that doesn't act like it cares. A family that never gave up. And 5 children who slipped between the seams of history, never be seen again, or maybe seen all the time, just not recognized. You call that a resolution? No, you call that a haunting. The Sodder family didn't move on. They couldn't. Their life became a shrine to the missing, not in some poetic way. In a daily, choking, breath-in-the-throat way. George Sodder died in 1969, still waiting for someone, anyone, to knock on his door and say, "We found them." He never heard those words. Jenny lived until 1989. 44 years of black mourning clothes. 44 years of unanswered prayers. She kept the billboard up until the day she died. And even then, her surviving children maintained it. Because by that point, the billboard wasn't just for Louis, Martha, Jenny, Betty, and Maurice. It was for everyone who ever lost something and never got it back. It became American folklore, but the kind whispered in truck stops and passed like poison in small towns. School children grew up pointing at it on long drives. Tourists took pictures and asked if it was real. It wasn't a monument to grief anymore. It was a roadside scream in bold lettering, a public accusation that never faded. And the Sodder family, they split in two. Some wanted to believe the children died in the fire, because believing anything else meant living in a world where 5 kids could vanish and no one would stop it. Others refused to stop digging. Even as their hair turned white, they called government offices. They hired sketch artists to imagine what their siblings might look like at 30, 50, 70 years old. One daughter, Sylvia, was just 2 when the fire happened. She spent her life chasing shadows. "I believe they were kidnapped," she said in her 70s. "And I don't believe they died in that fire." She was still giving interviews well into the 2000s, her voice trembling but sharp, like someone who'd memorized the shape of the hole left behind. The billboard came down sometime in the 1980s. But the questions refused to go quietly. There are podcasts, forums, Reddit threads with titles like, "What Really Happened to the Sodder Children?" Each one its own digital seance, begging for the truth to rise from the grave. But the answers never came. And that's the legacy. Not just a case that went cold, but a system that never warmed up to begin with. A town that turned away. A country that accepted paperwork over proof. This is what happens when fire dies, but the silence keeps burning. This is that story. Because what are we supposed to do with it? We can accept that 5 children vaporized without a trace in a fire that burned for 45 minutes. We can believe that no bones, no teeth, no screams, no witnesses make sense. We can nod along while officials lie about wiring, while chiefs plant liver in boxes, while trucks refuse to start and ladders move themselves. Or we can ask the obvious. What if the Sodder children were never meant to be found? Not by accident, not by failure, but by design. It's the kind of horror that doesn't drip blood. It evaporates identity. 5 children erased like chalk in the rain. And worse, a family gaslit for daring to notice. No one paid for what happened. Not with a job, not with a reputation, not with a confession scribbled on a wall. And maybe that's the part that sticks in your throat long after the story ends. There's this quote, buried in a journal maybe, or whispered by someone too tired to keep chasing ghosts. It goes, "The worst thing you can lose is not your child. It's the world's willingness to look for them." That's what haunts me. Not the missing bones. Not the letters. Not even that goddamn photo that may or may not be Louis Sodder grown up and trapped in someone else's life. No, it's the quiet. The absolute, indifferent quiet that followed 5 disappearances, and the way it stretched, not just over Fayetteville, West Virginia, but across decades, across generations. You want the truth? Here it is. The Sodder case was never just about what happened that night. It was about how quickly a society can decide someone's gone, and how violently it resists undeciding it. Somewhere out there, the real story still exists. In a box, in memory, in a mouth that stayed shut for 80 years. And every time we tell it, really tell it, we pound on that door just a little louder, because someone needs to. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next case.